So welcome everybody. Good morning everybody. Hope you had a good journey to Barcelona. I will just introduce you briefly to BCBT, and then for who doesn't know this wonderful summer school that, as the slide says, is at the 7th edition. So congratulations also to BCBT and their participants and organizers. Oh, well, a nice graphics here to indicate that we had many happy years. So please go and check what happened all these 7 years. Actually, don't they say the 7th year is a very difficult one for happy marriages? But we will go through it. So just to say that BCBT is a summer school that is supported by several sponsors. In particular, the Convergent Science Network is a coordination action, a European project from the FP7 program, and by UPF, which is our university here, the University Pompeu Fabra, and by Phonos and the group SPECS, for which some of the organizers work for. The program committee this year, it's composed by Paul Vischer, Lea Krubitzer from UC Davis. So welcome also to Lea, and she will actually build up a very nice program with Tony and Paul and Tony Prescott from University of Sheffield, also from the Convergent Science Network. And of course, all the support from the local organizers, like Mireia Mora, that you all know because you have talked to her somewhere down the line, and all the people here, and the IT and other people that helped. But so this year, just briefly, we have, like every year actually, 2 weeks program, and the first week it's about evolutionary and developmental aspects of the nervous system and behavior. And the second week is more about brain, core brain systems and CSN road mapping. We will talk about these topics later on during the school. Yeah, we will have a great program, but BCBT is not just lectures, it's also tutorials. So the students will be attending tutorials in the afternoon. So after lunch, from 3:30 until 5 or 6, depends on how we update the program. So there will be some updates that are not in the program. So every day you have to attend the tutorials, especially the first week. Then there are projects. So you have to work on projects starting, well, one of these days, probably in the mid of the week, we will present to you some possible projects, and it will be discussed how to go on with these projects. And at the end of week 2, you will have to present the results of these projects, but we will have time to talk about that. And of course, the fun part is the social events, so don't miss those. Tomorrow we will have an apéro, as every year, in the same place, in a hotel overlooking Barcelona. It's really lovely there. And then some beach time, and of course dinner. And then you can do any sports you want in Barcelona, but after school. Then it's important, BCBT, or let's say the Convergent Science Network, offers always every year some scholarships, and quite some of you have got some scholarship. Not all of you, but so especially those that have that were granted a scholarship have to write a report about their attendance in the school. So there will be no certificate of attendance unless we receive your report. So start ahead of time. So yeah, this is just to tell you about the Convergent Science Network, which is the coordination action that support this school. And with this school, we support also other activities. In particular, CSN wish to facilitate and develop the deployment of multidisciplinary methods new technology to understand and advance engineering of biomimetic and biohybrid systems. And we support this coordination action supports several activities like producing lectures like this ones. We also have podcast interviews, but with the speakers. And we also we produce some books, some of which you will be using during the tutorial, for instance. We also have a blog, so I invite you to visit our blog, our Convergent Science Network blog, and of course, tweet about BCBT. So every day you are invited to comment on the lecture you follow, not to criticize us, but to add, to add some positive content to it. And so you can find the lectures. For instance, CSN has a YouTube channel where you can find all the BCBT lectures. And we have our podcasts that you can also find in iTunes. And you will find all the links when you visit the Convergent Science Network webpage. And of course, please write about BCBT on Twitter, if you can, at CSN Network.
In positive terms, otherwise you won't get a...
No, exactly. Also that. So I leave it at that, and I wish you a fantastic 2 weeks of wonderful science. And so I leave it now to the other organizers that will introduce the very interesting topics, scientific topics at this time. So enjoy it.
All right, good morning, everybody. I'm Paul Verschure, one of the co-chairs of BCBT, and this is the 7th edition of the school. And I would like you to give a little bit more, let's say, context and background to the whole school that we're running here, and what we want to achieve. It's all about dolphins, because dolphins are cool. All right, thank you. So okay, here we see our co-chairs. So Leah and Tony will run the show very much for this week. That's on purpose, so I don't have to do anything. So I'm really pleased with how things are evolving here. Let's look, what does the Convergent Science Network stand for? What do we really want to achieve with this? So why are you all here? What kind of indoctrination program have we sucked you into? Well, you know, we have a very specific target in mind. The Convergent Science Network is basically making a statement on, let's say, the future of our science, of mind and brain, and how it also links to technology development. Okay? And we started CSN about 6 years ago, and apparently 1990 is a really important year. And it's a reaction to, let's say, a cycle we can see in the study of mind and brain. All right? Like, originally, it all started out with guys like Helmholtz and Wundt and Wagner and these German psychologists and the Dutch Donders, and they were followed up a few decades later by a whole wave of American psychologists. But initially, the focus of the scientific study of mind was very much experience, if you want, consciousness, right? And then, in sort of the new world, the movement of behaviorism emerged in a very strong reaction to this continental structuralist school that said, well, you know, actually this is not very scientific because it's all very subjective, it depends on introspection. We need a science of mind and brain, and this science has to be structured like we study physics. It has to be all observable and measurable, quantified. Yeah? So this became behaviorism. But
sorry, you have to speak on the microphone.
Really? I'm not loud enough? Okay.
You want a mic?
Well, if you want to touch me. Okay. Jose feels lonely, so that's okay, Jose. He had a holiday break, so you know.
Yeah.
He was socially deprived, and now he wants to touch me. Be gentle, okay?
Okay. Don't worry.
Yeah, thank you,
It would
Jose.
be nice.
Yes, thank you. I feel a lot better now. Is that better, Anna? All right. Yeah. So you see, there are no secrets. We don't hide anything from you. Full transparency. But behaviorism ended up with what's called the notion of an empty organism. Like we looked at the behavior at the outside of the system, and we manipulated that system from the outside, and we just assumed that there were no decisive intermediate factors that were internal to this organism. Unfortunately, life wasn't that simple. Okay, it turned out that behavior is very much also self-structured. It depends on the organism itself and its experience. So this school sort of failed on those grounds. And then the interesting thing happened in the late 40s and 50s with what's called cybernetics, which did, let's say, rather well for about 10 years, more looking at behavior from the perspective of control, from the perspective of constructing systems, and then it died a silent death because actually all the research money went into a notion of, let's say, a computational intelligence, artificial intelligence. And what's interesting about the study of intelligence and artificial intelligence, it was exactly a negation of the behaviorist program. We went from an empty organism that was behaving to a disembodied mind. Okay, so now it all became about the rules and representations of the mind, following a computer metaphor. Okay, now this also failed because they just didn't deliver on their promises of building this artificial mind. And also they ran into very fundamental problems. Like for instance, if you want to manipulate knowledge, where does this knowledge come from? Right? They would say, well, we can have a whole army of programmers just put this knowledge into the computer. It's not working, right? So this led to what's called the symbol grounding problem. So this also failed. And then in the 90s, we ended up in a very strange intermediate period, which you could call a metaphorical biology. So we had connectionism, genetic algorithms, artificial life, a very metaphorical interpretation of biology, okay? Because if you take a genetic algorithm, it's like constrained random search, all right? But evolution doesn't progress through constrained random search. It's a very deep misunderstanding about how evolution operates, even though we don't fully understand it yet, right? So connectionism, same deal. People built very simple computational structures based on matrix algebra and said, oh, and this is the brain, right? Wasn't that easy? Okay, it was all very metaphorical. And also in that sense, if you want, in the attempt to build a science of mind and brain, we're actually building a pseudoscience based on metaphor. That's not really helping. Of course, you can, in their defense, you could argue, oh, but at least they opened the door to thinking about biology in the brain. Okay, fine. If you want to give them something, we can give them that, even though I'm not convinced. And this was then accompanied by a philosophical school called eliminative materialism, going back to the behaviorists, saying, well, in the future, we'll just converse in brain speak. We will not say, like, oh, I feel so happy. No, we would say, oh, my ventral tegmental area is a bit more active than usual. All right? Because we have a fully objective description of our psychological mental states. That's real science. Okay? Well, it's all failed now. The proponents of this now are writing books about their youth and how this all impacts morality. Also, they gave up without ever explaining to us why this failed. Okay, so, and in my opinion, this is signaling a scientific crisis. Because actually, if you end up dealing with metaphor, you gave up understanding and explaining reality. Right? You run the risk of running a cargo cult science. And that's actually what's happening now, because what's happening now, okay, we have the brain, but we look at brain through these spectacles of big data. So indeed, you see here the crisis that was signaled by this metaphorical biological phase is now being realized, because people are basically saying, look, let's just get the data. Let's collect all the stamps that are being produced on this planet to understand how postal services work. Right? Let's get all the facts, all the data. And I think that this is the end of science. And so this is, in my opinion, really sacrificing the scientific method that we have been trying to develop in the study of mind and brain, and we got to do something about it. And that's why you're here. Okay? So what are we going to do about it? Well, the Convergent Science Network says, well, look, actually we have to bring the brain back to what we could call experience. Okay? We have to go back to these original questions about the functional properties of brains and what they mean, but now from this perspective of structure. And we do that, as you will see, by actually building artificial brains for artificial bodies. So this is very much the ambition of the Convergent Science Network, is to help us build this step back into a science of mind and brain, as opposed to a pseudoscience that just collects all the data, puts it in a big cloud, probably run by a big American company like Google or Facebook, and then you push the button and Jesus will be reborn. All right? That is how it's going to happen. All right? And I think that's a problem. It's not going to be like that. All right? And now it's all up to you to help me do something about it. So that's why we started Convergent Science Network, also with Tony, who is sort of updating his Facebook page here on row 2. And because he believes in technology.
I'm tweeting.
And he's tweeting. Yeah. So this is what we want to get away from, this mind and brain nihilism, where we study zombie brains. Do you know why zombies don't tell jokes? Exactly. They have no brain. They're not like us. Okay? That's another American invention. It's Hollywood propaganda. No, but anyway, what I tried to say with this is, this whole stream towards big data leads to a sort of a nihilism, a denial of the complexity and multi-scale organization of brains, and that we need theory to access and decipher that structuring. Okay? And for that, we want to face this challenge now. Like, how can we understand this animal with this brain? And our answer to that is, and what we're exploring in Convergent Science Network, in BCBT, in our conference living machines, is that actually by constructing biologically grounded artifacts. And that's something else than biologically inspired, but I will not start about that because then I'll get all upset again. This is our objective: build artificial, biologically grounded systems to explain and understand these biological counterparts. But in doing this, we advance our technology. We build new technologies, right? Technologies that can have a great impact in society. Not necessarily for, let's say, aggressive applications, but just to advance quality of existence, all right? So this is what we want to achieve. So this is another way to look at it. Here we have psyche. Here we have the flesh of the human brain. This is our challenge. It's not to get all this data, how many neurons, how many synapses, how are all the synapses in an exactly connected. It's nice to have, but does it really matter to actually understand function? So we want to get back to a more system level understanding of that system, guided by theories and hypotheses about these functional properties. So it's all about this, okay? Understanding the brain. Here you have another example of modern anatomy, okay? And we can crack this nut, okay? We will take out the onions and the vegetables next time, all right? So this is what we want to achieve. But now, if we place this study in the context of biology and the brain, our study of these functional properties, we should pay heed to Dobzhansky's heuristic that, of course, nothing in biology makes sense except in light of evolution. Now, suddenly, if we pose these questions about functional properties of brains, if it's memory or perception or action selection, now we have an additional constraint that can actually help us, and that's a heuristic, right? And it's also that heuristic that we try to explore very strongly in the first week of this meeting, looking at how evolution and development work together to produce brains that can tell you all these nonsensical things I'm telling you right now. Although it's deeply meaningful to myself. So here you go. We used our local time machine to measure the amount of life forms on planet Earth over the last 2 billion years. And then Sietse animated all of that for us. So this is evolution, or representation of how we can think about evolution in terms of the amount of life forms on planet Earth. And somewhere around this time, during the Cambrian explosion, about 500 to 560 million years ago, something special happened. Right? This is where the brains that we know and love and study actually emerged with the 30 basic body plans that are still defining the animals that we know and study. And this is really now what we try to, what were the basic design principles of these systems is now our question. Understanding these design principles will also then help us build the technology we're after in a way to validate our hypotheses on these design principles. I personally believe that also this is a period where consciousness emerged. And if anyone is interested in that, I can explain it to you in more detail in a coffee break or when you're really drunk. But it's all true. So this is our mission. We're going to link psyche to the flesh via building happy robots. You can choose the color of the tutu. This is what CSN is after. Here you have a word cloud of the kind of activities that this field of biomimetics and neurotechnology is generating. This is part of a roadmap document we've produced under Tony's inspiring leadership. And you see a strong emphasis here on the issue of control. So we're not thinking about brains as computation. We think more about brains as control systems, controlling behavior in the real world in real time. And that's why you see robots as an important aspect. This is a way to give these models a body and to act in the real world. So that was all the contextualization I'm going to do for you today. So I just wanted to give you a sketch of our ambition. All right? We're going to have 2 days in the second week where we're actually going to elaborate this a bit more with respect to building a roadmap towards future outlooks of this field. We're going to get a bunch of experts, we're going to have a lot of discussion on, okay, where are we going with this field? What are the obstacles we're facing? What are the next steps we gotta address? And so what are our opportunities? So you're going to hear more of that. So our format, to repeat a bit, Anna. So we have talks, but the talks are fairly long. It's very special about this school. You know, I was in this meeting just a few months ago, and then this chairman is there sleeping during the talk, and suddenly they wake up and say, oh, it's time, we got to go, no more questions. And I think that's terrible, right? It's a school like this, a workshop, is not there for the speaker to dump this information packet on your lap and run away. We want to understand something, we want to learn something. We want to learn something from our speakers. So we want to give them time to tell their story, and we want to give ourselves time to just interrupt them continuously, right? And we don't want to have anyone, to have the excuse that, oh no, wait, I only have 40 minutes, I cannot answer your question. Of course, you know, that's very fishy, right? Because they don't have the answer. So we took away all these excuses, okay? So I've done my part now to create the space for all of you guys to interrupt, okay, as much as you want. But now it's up to you to do that. Okay? And I know people from your generation are very shy, right? So drop that. Okay? Just if you don't understand something, you interrupt. You say, look, I don't understand it. Now, one reason why you want to do that is because I am easily confused. And then if you don't watch out, I'm taking most of those interruption times. And you don't want to avoid that. Right? Okay. So that's why we have a lot of time for our speakers. Then we have our tutorials. The tutorials are focusing very much also on the project. It's really hands-on, skill-oriented, that you can do something. Because we want you to do stuff. We want you to realize projects. So you're gonna present these projects in the end, and we have prizes. Yeah, prizes. It's amazing. Yeah. So you can bring it home and says, I won a prize. Yeah, in Barcelona. It's cool. Yeah. You got it? So, okay, so you do your projects, learn the tutorials. Then with all the speakers, we're going to do podcast interviews, which will be mainly run by Tony and myself. Tony is a nice guy, so we're balanced, you know. So don't worry. We're going to have panel discussions, which are highly entertaining. Then we have social activities. And then above all, do we have sound here? Jose? Whoever is there. Okay, but then I didn't mention the most important aspect of the school. So I really want you to pay close attention. And do you have your passports with you? Yeah? All right. It's our Eurovision Song Contest. Okay? failure to participate means no certificate of participation in the school. Anna. Okay? So,
And there is a prize for that too.
I need sound. Okay, so that was the Italian entry of last year. And they had the highest scores you see here. So the point is, everybody with the same passport, right, prepares a performance for our final dinner. The final dinner is on the Thursday of the second week. Second week, Thursday, right? And then we all perform during this dinner, and you can win prizes, okay? And we're going to vote. We all vote, right? Who is the best? Spain sits always somewhere here. France is always somewhere here. And then another example is the team that remarkably always loses, even though so just that you don't feel too oppressed.
It was burning like a silver flame. Summer down through the air.
It's good, right?
Venus was her name. She got it. Yeah,
Okay, so we like sports. Anyway, you got a bit of range now, right? So we have good harmony, good solo performance. Okay, so be prepared for this. Also, we like sports, always goes very well. Actually, this is a boat containing one of the leading experts on decision making. Mike Shetland is on this boat. They were not able to ride it, okay? So, okay. So, all right, now to conclude. This is my friend Sam the Man. Sam the Man is living here just around the corner, and Sam the Man is our enforcer, yeah? And he wants to enforce some simple rules of this meeting. So we start around 9:30, I'm told. Correct. So it would be nice when you're here. I think you get the point, right? Because if you're collectively not here, then it's sort of annoying for the speaker, right? And I have to invent excuses on all your behalf, which is hard. I do this regularly, but please try to be here on time. Be active, don't hide behind your laptops, updating your Facebook pages and so on. Because we're here to learn something. We have 2 weeks together to really learn stuff. And we have some amazing speakers, we have a great program. It's a real opportunity, so make use of it, okay? And if you want, I can hassle you about that, active involvement, throughout the meeting. But just do it. It's a great opportunity for everybody. There are no stupid questions. So just go for it, yeah? If possible, switch off your phones. Annoying, right? Have these phones going off all the time. Focus on the projects, because why the projects are cool, it's a real concrete way to work together, to learn stuff, test ideas, make progress. So it's a great opportunity. We have a wonderful infrastructure, everything works, okay? So make use of that, yeah? And then lastly, win the Song Festival. This is our main objective. The rest is just an excuse to run our Song Festival, okay? So just go for that and win eternal fame. All right, so thank you and enjoy BCBT.
I don't have to touch Paul, do I?
But I can touch you. No, we have Jose for that. He has the magic touch. You got everything you need, Tony?
I hope so. I need that adapter. Thank you.
allowed to bring coffee and food into the lecture hall.
Yeah, I've got the spinning beach ball of death at the moment. It's gone, it's gone. Okay, so week one, there is a theme. Does everyone realize that? Anyone know what the theme is? What's the theme?
Evolution and development.
Ah, okay, that's cheating.
EVO-DEVO.
Yes, that's better. Okay, what is EVO-DEVO?
Do we have to give your talk for you now?
Yes. I'm just going to, if someone at the back, EVO-DEVO? Evolution and development. So, it's not showing. Usually helps to open and close the laptop. No.
They got a switch.
Showing on here. Take it out and put it in again. I knew I should ask you. Yeah. So Paul explained that CSN is about building artifacts. What we want to do, because at the end of the day we want our science to be useful, is we want to use our understanding of biology, and particularly of the brain, in order to make an impact in society. And that's a serious commitment that we have to make our science socially useful in the long term. But we want to do good science. So in this diagram, we're showing the relationship between biology and technology, and what you might think of as biomimetics is the translation of principles in biology into new technologies. And that's something that many people are exploring and pursuing and quite successfully. Our approach aims to do that, but what we want to do is go via the medium of modeling. So really science is what we care about. We want to build models of the biology, but we believe that a good model of a biological system can then be a demonstration of those principles and how they can be transferred into another domain and then can lead to technology. So you might hear quite a lot about building models of biological systems, but ultimately our goal is to model those systems in order to understand not only ourselves, but how to build useful technologies. Now, I want to, in my brief introduction, to talk about evolution and development, and then I'll pass over to this week's co-organizer, Leah Krubitzer, who will give you her view on it, and I think they converge. I want to start with this slide, which is shows you the amount of DNA in different kinds of animals. And this is in terms of DNA base pairs. There's about 3 billion base pairs in humans, and actually if you look across all the mammals, we've got a very similar number of base pairs as other mammals. But what's interesting, I think, in this diagram is that if you look down here, you have single-celled organisms, those ones that were around 1 billion years ago. And then these are the animals that start to appear in the Cambrian explosion. And you can see that pretty much all of these animals have a similar amount of DNA in them. And in fact, the creatures with the most DNA turn out to be flowering plants. So if the appearance of complex things like brains is down to evolution, it's not down to increasing the amount of information in the genome. So that's one mystery that we want to try and understand. And the second one is that actually the brain isn't built according to a plan which is in the genome. What happens, well, the brain is built by processes that occur during development and even during our life. And they begin with the appearance of different cells, and then they migrate to different positions inside the body, and they differentiate into different kinds of cell types. Then they grow connections. Some of them apparently systematically seem to die off, and then the synapses rearrange themselves. All this happens, and what we know is that there isn't enough DNA to specify all these processes and what happens, so there must be something else going on. If we look in the human brain, this is what your cortex would look like the day you're born. You would have the cell bodies, but you wouldn't yet have the connections. And humans are particularly unusual in this regard, that we're born with a very immature brain. And you can see after 3 months, the connections start to grow in. After 2 years, there's this massive forest of connections. So we're born with this very immature brain. And one reason is that in order to organize the brain, we need input from the world. So your brain will wire itself up, but the processes that wire it up need input. They need to be in the environment. So one of the important principles that we want to understand is natural selection. So Darwin, of course, proposed the principle of natural selection in his book. And ever since then, people have focused on the genome as being the place where natural selection happens. And so people think about genes mutating and the evolution of different genomes leading to different species. Interestingly, Darwin, of course, was writing at a time when we really didn't know about genes and about DNA. He was just describing what he observed in nature as being the differences between organisms and how they appeared to be different as a result of some competition, which he called natural selection. And because he didn't understand the processes giving rise to the variation which natural selection was operating on, he was agnostic about it. And what he said was that natural selection occurs because of variation. And variation can proceed from anything. From whatever cause proceeding, there might be some variation. And that's what the natural selection is operating on. So it doesn't have to be variation in the genome, and it could be variation elsewhere. And of course, Darwin was not clear about what mechanisms were giving rise to variation. And one possible form of variation is things that happen in development. And there's a great history going back hundreds of years of people looking at development mechanisms, Haeckel and Weiss and so on, and showing that there are pattern-generating processes, what people call epigenesis, happening and giving rise to different animal forms. But the success of genetics, and genetics, of course, is extremely powerful and extremely useful, but it has, to some extent, blinded people to the importance of these other processes that give rise to variation, development. And indeed, since the 1940s, with the discovery of the role of genomes, and I think this is increased with things like our increased understanding of the human genome, there is a reductionist emphasis on the selection of genes as being the basis for evolutionary change. And what we're interested to do this week is to try and balance that understanding of evolution as selection of genes with an understanding of self-organizing processes giving rise to bodies and brains and how these two things operate together. So this reductionist emphasis actually parallels, I think, what Paul was referring to, that similarly in neuroscience, we're in a bit of a reductionist phase now, looking down to the neuron, the synapse, and thinking we're going to have an understanding of the operation of the brain at that level. And a principle that we can learn from looking at the evolution of bodies and brains is that there's multiple levels of explanation. So one of the things that has caused people to re-examine this process of evolution is the discovery that some of the genes that we have are very highly conserved, and particularly these genes known as the Hox genes, which are involved in body patterning. Right across different multicelled animal types, the metazoans here, you get the same clusters of genes being involved in body patterning. It can be a Drosophila, it can be a mouse, it can be a human. We all have these Hox gene clusters, and they're involved in body patterning in all these different animals with different body types. So you can get a different body type, but you can have the same underlying gene structure. So that was one of the mysteries that caused people to go back and think again about development. And it's this combination of evolution and development that's given rise to this new field of EVO-DEVO that we want to discuss this week. And we want to try and understand how development and evolution work together to produce the complex structures in our brains and bodies that generate our behavior. And then we want to think about how those mechanisms could perhaps be duplicated in artificial systems and feed through some useful technologies. So EVO-DEVO is the synthesis of developmental biology, and this is how functional biology, your anatomy, physiology, your cell biology, and so on, how that changes over time. And then evolutionary biology, you can think about the change in developmental biology over time. So this is what happens during your lifespan. This is what happens over generations. Evolution involves heritable changes in development. That's one way of understanding EVO-DEVO. It's not just about the genome, it's about anything that happens in development that could be inherited. And development doesn't stop after the fetus, after the baby is born. Development continues, of course, throughout the lifespan. And Darwin understood this, and people should recognize that when we think about natural selection, Darwin was thinking about the selection of developmental processes. He mentioned this in a letter to an American biologist, Asa Gray. He said, "Embryology is to me by far the strongest single class of facts in favor of change of forms." So I'll just give you one example of the way development is important in generating complexity in the brain. And this is the principle of the morphogenetic field. And morphogenetic fields are modular entities inside nervous systems, and they're specified by genes. So you have two genes here. I think this one is WRT, sort of specifying one axis, and this is BMP, specifying the dorsoventral axis. And based on those gene gradients, you get patterning inside this area of the morphogenetic field. And then, of course, there's lots of interaction within these areas, giving rise to local complexity. And what we've done is invite experts here this week to help us understand how this interaction of the genome with developmental processes gives rise to these complex forms that we see generating interesting behavior. So it's this mix of generative processes and adaptive processes, form-selecting processes, that give rise to the complexity that we want to understand. This is just one last example. These are butterfly wings, and this is a picture from Sean Carroll, University of Madison. And this variation is mostly from self-organization. And in fact, he showed that things like the eye spots on butterfly wings aren't the result of the evolution of some new gene-based process. In fact, it's using existing genes primarily, but using them in a different way to create the body pattern of the butterfly and to create all this fascinating and beautiful variation in butterfly wings. So this week, some of the things I'm hoping to learn, because I'm also relatively new to this field, is to understand how we can use EVO-DEVO to think about evolvability, because evolvability is also something that we want to have in our artifacts. Ultimately, we want to be able to discover a toolbox for building new kinds of machines. And I don't think we're going to be able to do that. We're not going to be able to take the standard engineering route of specifying everything before we build it. We're going to have to build some mechanisms that are going to be able to build complex systems, things like robot brains for us. So that toolbox, the only example we have of a toolbox for building anything like the brain is something that we get from biology. And the important tools are the developmental processes that give rise to brain structures, nervous system structures, and how they operate inside the body. And it's that which I hope we're going to learn about this week. So it's this combination of generative processes. You probably will hear the word self-organization as another way of talking about ways of generating variation and generating complex forms. And of course, those self-organizing mechanisms are often going to be tuned to the environment that they're in and modified by that context is going to be important, including the external context. And then there's learning mechanisms, and you might hear about the Baldwin effect, I think, in one of our talks, and the way that learning interacts with generative processes to make the evolution of advanced forms easier. And then perhaps we'll hear about intra-evolutionary mechanisms, the kind of selection processes that can occur even inside development, inside the brain. So some of the things we might emphasize are modularity. How do different parts of the brain develop separately? What are the mechanisms for evolving modularity? Because modularity itself is something that makes systems evolvable if they can be modular. We might hear about layering, how things like the cortex self-organize into multiple layers, how different parts of the brain coordinate during development, and how that changes during evolution. Okay, so I think I've had more than my share of time. I'm going to pass over to my co-organizer for this week, Leah Krubitzer, who is going to, I think, fill you in on the other details of this week's talks. Leah.